Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the invisible economic forces and kind of fascinating psychological laws that dictate literally every single purchase you make. Whether you're grabbing a morning cup of coffee, finally snagging those new shoes, or even deciding how to spend a quick weekend getaway, there is a hidden mathematical architecture behind your choices. And today, we're going to make that architecture completely visible.
So let's kick things off with a bit of a brain teaser. Why do consumers consistently buy things like cigarettes or junk food that have known, proven negative impacts on their health? I mean, if we're rational beings, shouldn't we only spend our hard-earned cash on things that are strictly good for us?
Well, the answer to that lies in a foundational concept in economics called utility. Now, in economics, utility represents a mental assessment of expected satisfaction. It's simply the want-satisfying capacity of a commodity. It is completely subjective and depends entirely on the consumer's own viewpoint, not on any objective health outcome or practical everyday usefulness.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. Defining the utility concept. 2. The math of satisfaction. 3. Diminishing marginal utility. 4. The marginal utility of money. 5. Consumer surplus explained. And 6. The equi-marginal utility law.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, defining the utility concept, satisfaction versus usefulness. We really need to challenge our basic assumptions here about what makes an item valuable to a buyer. Because we naturally tend to conflate value with goodness, right? But economics requires us to separate the two completely. What's super fascinating is that utility has absolutely no ethical implications. The fact that a commodity has utility for someone doesn't mean it's actually beneficial for them. It has utility simply because the consumer believes it'll satisfy a want. This is exactly why objectively harmful things, like cigarettes, have immense utility for certain buyers. They satisfy an immediate craving, plain and simple. Moving on to Section 2, the math of satisfaction, featuring what we'll call the banana experiment. Let's look at exactly how this satisfaction is measured using an everyday scenario. Imagine we're tracking a super hungry shopper eating bananas one by one. As they eat, their overall total utility, that sum of all satisfaction, obviously climbs, going from 25 to 43 up to 65. The average utility just divides that total by the number of bananas eaten. But the really crucial metric here is the marginal utility. That's the joy derived exclusively from the very next banana. The first banana is amazing, 25 units of utility, but the second one only adds 18 units. By the fifth, just 3 units. And that sixth banana brings 0 additional utility. Our consumer is completely stuffed. And here is where it gets wild. By the time our consumer forces down a 7th banana, the marginal utility actually drops to -2. It literally causes dissatisfaction, or what economists call disutility. The total utility actually falls from 65 back down to 63. You can quite literally have too much of a good thing. Which brings us to Section 3, diminishing marginal utility, the inevitable decline. This is the fundamental economic role governing our consumption. As Alfred Marshall so perfectly put it, we have an endless variety of wants, but there is a limit to each separate want. Think about being incredibly thirsty. That first glass of water? Life-saving. It gives you massive utility. The second glass is refreshing. But by the fourth glass, your thirst is totally quenched, and the utility drops to 0. The additional satisfaction you get keeps decreasing with every increase in the stock you already have. This inevitable decline creates a very sharp downward slope in satisfaction. But of course, there are always fascinating exceptions, right? The law assumes all other things are equal. For instance, what if you're buying a single shoe? The second shoe actually holds way more utility than the first because now you have a usable pair. Or think about rare art collections and vintage coins. Adding to the stock actually increases the intensity of the collector's desire. Even a really short holiday can temporarily defy the law, leaving you wanting more instead of less. All right, Section 4, the marginal utility of money, adding a price tag. Let's introduce a real-world constraint to our banana experiment. Because we don't just consume until we're physically full, we consume until our wallets tell us to stop. Think back to our banana consumer. Let's say the price of one banana is equivalent to exactly 12 units of utility. For the first banana, they pay 12 but experience 25 units of joy. That is a huge win. The second costs 12 but yields 18. Still a solid win. But the third banana yields exactly 12 units of utility. If the cost is 12, a rational consumer will stop buying the exact moment the marginal utility of the next banana drops to that price point. This exact psychological mechanism is what dictates market demand. Section 5. Consumer Surplus Explained. The Invisible Profit. So you might be wondering, what happens to that extra satisfaction the consumer got from those earlier bananas? Remember, the first banana gave them 25 units of joy, but they only paid 12. That's 13 free units of utility. Alfred Marshall called this excess satisfaction consumer surplus. It's essentially an invisible profit you make in pure joy. It's that absolute thrill you feel when you get an amazing deal on something you desperately wanted. Now, granted, this concept is highly subjective and assumes the utility of money itself remains constant, which isn't always true, but it beautifully explains the joy of a bargain. Finally, let's hit Section 6, the Equimarginal Utility Law, the ultimate juggling act, because let's face it, you don't just buy bananas, you're juggling apples, bread, coffee, and gasoline. Imagine you have a strict, fixed budget of exactly 7 rupees. You have to frame your shopping as a strategic game to maximize your total joy per rupee spent across 4 totally different commodities. How on earth does a rational human brain sort this out? Well, your brain essentially runs rapid-fire calculus. You survey all the options and spend your first rupee on the item giving you the biggest bang for your buck, say commodity C, giving 36 units of utility. Your second rupee naturally goes to the next highest option, maybe commodity B at 35. You just logically progress, constantly comparing the marginal utility of every option until your entire 7 rupee budget is perfectly depleted. And that perfectly defines the law of equal marginal utility. It states that you, as a rational consumer, distribute your cash so that the very last rupee spent on any commodity brings you the exact same amount of satisfaction. You're constantly shifting your spending until the joy per dollar is completely balanced across your whole shopping cart. Now, obviously, this mathematical juggling act has its limits. It falls apart when items are indivisible. I mean, you can't buy half a car just to perfectly balance your utility budget. It also gets tricky with complementary goods, like a car and gasoline, where the utility of one relies entirely on the other. And honestly, none of us are calculating marginal utility for incredibly tiny, insignificant purchases like a pack of gum. But the real beauty of these economic laws isn't that we're all perfectly rational robots doing math in the grocery aisle. It's that these invisible forces guide our natural instincts, shaping market demand on a massive scale. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard look at your own budget this week. Ask yourself, are you truly maximizing your everyday utility, or are you just buying that 7th banana out of pure habit? Think about it. Thanks for learning with me today.